Tips. Moonshine Life Recipes Group. Ingredients. Pure corn whiskey is made from the simple and natural ingredients: corn, malt, water, and yeast. The mash should be composed of 80 to 90% corn with a 10 to 20% adjunct of malt too. Supply enzymes. Malt enzymes will be explained below and in the chapter on mashing. Corn. Corn in most of its forms, e.g. cornmeal, corn flour, flaked maize, can be used to make whiskey. The corn must be top-quality food-grade corn. Any attempts to use cow corn or chicken feed will only produce inferior results, possibly with noxious off flavors due to additives that may be present in the feed. The starches in hard grains such as cornmeal or corn flour require dispersing in the mash water by performing a full boil for about 20 or 30 minutes. This is described in Appendix A. Other mashing methods. However, with flaked maize, which is already dispersed corn that has been hot rolled the way rolled oats are made, the grain starches readily disperse into the 65.5 degrees Celsius (150 degrees Fahrenheit) mash water without the need of boiling. Not having to boil the grain makes for a considerably more convenient mashing process, and for that reason flaked maize has been chosen as the primary form of corn in this text. How to mash other forms of corn as well as other types of grain is described in Appendix A. Flaked maize can be purchased at most health food or bulk food stores. Some such stores don't stock it because the demand for it for home use is fairly low, but most will gladly order it for use since it comes from the same distributors that supply all their other grain products. You may have to ask them to order it anyway even if they do carry it, since you will generally want a 22.7 k 50 pounds bag of it, which is often more than they will have on hand. Ordering it typically takes about a week. It can also be purchased at home brewers' supply shops. At full retail price, flaked maize usually costs a little more than cornmeal, but if you buy a 22.7 k 50 pounds bag it will be cheaper than the retail price of cornmeal. Malt. The word malt describes a process, as much as it is the name of certain grain products. Any type of grain can be malted. That is, sprouted then kiln-dried to kill the sprouts. When grain is just beginning to sprout, it produces many different enzymes to break down the endosperm, i.e. the large starchy mass in each kernel of grain, to provide food to nourish the rapidly growing grain plant. The sprouts are heated in a kiln at this early stage to kill them and preserve both the enzymes and the endosperm before the young plants consume them. The malt can then be used as a source of enzymes to convert grain starches, including its own, to fermentable sugars in a beer or whiskey mash. Of the many different enzymes produced during malting, the diastatic enzymes, i.e. enzymes that convert starch to sugar, are the most important to mashing. Also of importance to mashing are the protein-degrading enzymes. These produce nutrients that improve yeast performance in the subsequent fermentation step. Most of the common grains, e.g. corn, rye, barley, wheat, are available in malted form, but barley malt is by far the most widely used for making whiskey, and is therefore the choice in this text. The best place to buy barley malt is from home brewers' supply shops. These shops sell many varieties of barley malt, but only certain ones are suitable for making whiskey. First of all, malt extract, available as syrup or powder, has no diastatic enzymes and cannot be used for mashing. Only certain varieties of all-grain barley malts have the diastatic enzymes needed to convert the comparatively large quantities of starches in a whiskey mash to sugar. All-grain barley malts come in different varieties, from pale malts to caramelized malts to a full spectrum of roasted malts. Only the pale ale or light lager malts stated to be of high diastatic power are suited to making whiskey. The caramelized and roasted malts have, for all practical purposes, No diastatic power. Fortunately, the above-mentioned pale ale and light lager malts are the main staples of all grain brewing and are the most abundant varieties stocked by the home brewers' shops. They are usually the least expensive varieties as well. There are two types of high diastatic pale malts, 2-row and 6-row, and most home brewers' shops carry both. 6-row barley malt is well known to have the highest diastatic power. 6-row barley kernels are smaller than 2-row because their endosperms are smaller. Even though the kernels are smaller, each kernel produces the same amount of enzymes as larger kernels. With smaller kernels there are more kernels per kilogram of malt, and therefore more enzymes per kilogram. However, this is no longer of concern. The modified high diastatic 2-row pale malts made nowadays have very nearly the same diastatic power as the 6-row malts and work just as well for making whiskey. A lot of home brewers' shops also carry wheat malt and rye malt among their malt selection. These malts tend to be of high diastatic power and are well suited to whiskey making. Their use will not be covered in this book, but they can be substituted unit for barley malt in any of the procedures described in the following chapters. After you are comfortable with the processes of whiskey making, it is worthwhile experimenting with different grain malts. One last word about malt is the crush. In order to mash with malted grains they have to be crushed with a grain grinder. Nearly all home brewers' shops will crush the grain for you, or avail you of an on-premise grinder you can use to crush the malt you are buying. Beer mash requires sparging, i.e. a process of rinsing the sweet liquid from the spent grains after the starch conversion is complete. In order to sparge, the grain must form a filter bed that is loose enough to allow the liquid to pass through it. This requires a fairly coarse crush. Whiskey mash doesn't require sparging, so the crush can be much finer. A finer crush exposes slightly more of the enzymes and starch to the mash and is therefore beneficial. If the grain grinder is adjustable, adjust it for a fairly fine crush. If it's not adjustable, as a lot of roller mills aren't, the regular brewer's grind will work just fine. Water. The Scots and the Irish have maintained for centuries that the secret to making good whiskey lies in the mash water used. Modern science has revealed that the characteristics of the mash water are not only important to the quality of the whiskey, but some, e.g. iron content, and pH are pivotal to the function of the malt enzymes. The water used must be very nearly devoid of iron. A high iron content will denature, i.e. destroy, the enzymes. On the other hand, a fairly high calcium content, 5250 parts per million ppm, is beneficial to the subsequent fermentation and the resulting flavor of the finished whiskey. Sulfates are preferable to carbonates or bicarbonates, but all are acceptable in the process. If you are adding calcium, explained in the chapter on mashing, choose calcium sulfate. Gypsum over calcium carbonate, precipitated chalk. pH. pH is a measure of the acidity or alkalinity of an aqueous solution, i.e. a solution in water. A pH of 7 is exactly neutral, neither acid nor alkaline, e.g. pure water. A pH below 7 is acidic. The lower the pH, the stronger the acidity. A pH above 7 is alkaline. The higher the pH, the stronger the alkalinity. The full range of the pH scale is from 1 through 14. Malt enzymes will function in a pH from as low as 4.6 to as high as 8.0. However, at the extremes the starch conversion will be very slow and incomplete. The optimum range is from 5.2 to 5.5, but conversion does work very well at 6.0 and even as high as 7.0. Most source waters, even some of the best, will require some pH adjustment. This will be discussed in detail in the chapter on mashing. Very few source waters are too acidic for mashing. Almost all are either close to neutral or are alkaline. Virtually all municipal tap waters are alkaline. Most have a pH between 8 and 9, but some are carefully adjusted to around pH 7.4. If a municipal tap water were even slightly acidic, e.g. pH 6.9 over a period of years, the water would corrode the metallic parts in the water distribution system. Because of this, municipal water treatment plants ensure the water is not acidic by passing the water over crushed limestone, which is a crude unrefined form of calcium oxide, SaO. SaO turns to calcium hydroxide, CaO2, when mixed with water. This process is very cursory and does not offer very precise control over the resulting pH, so the resulting pH typically varies between 8 and 9. Some municipal water treatment plants use purified calcium hydroxide, CaO2, instead of crushed limestone and adjust